Tonight, we slip into the cold, candlelit corridors of Tudor England, where the throne was not so much a seat of power as a beautifully upholstered ejector seat. We are telling the story of Lady Jane Grey, the teenage girl who became Queen of England for roughly 9 days, which is about the same length of time most of us manage to keep a New Year's resolution. Have you ever been handed a job you never applied for by people who very much did not have your best interests at heart? Ever been promoted on a Monday and quietly disappeared by Wednesday? Well, get comfortable, because we are traveling back to England in the 1530s, to a kingdom where being born a little too close to the crown was not a blessing. Jane Grey was born in October 1537, the same month that brought forth King Edward VIII, the long-awaited male heir to Henry VIII. Jane's bloodline was impeccable. Her mother, Frances Brandon, was the daughter of Henry's younger sister Mary Tudor, the one who had briefly been Queen of France. That made Jane a great-niece of King Henry VIII, and a cousin to the young King Edward. Royal blood ran in her veins, and in Tudor England, that was less a gift than a target painted on her back. Jane was, by every account, a remarkably bright child. While her parents valued her mainly as a political asset, Jane herself found refuge in learning. Ines. For barely 14, she was corresponding with leading Protestant scholars of the day. She once openly compared herself favorably to her parents in conversation with the scholar Roger Ascham, describing the harsh correction she faced at home and the relief she found only in her tutor's gentle company. She was, in short, the kind of girl who read Plato by candlelight while the adults around her schemed about thrones. By the spring of 1553, the young king, Edward, Jane's cousin, was dying of what was likely tuberculosis. He was just 15 years old. As his device for the succession, in which he bypassed, but Edward, a committed Protestant, could not bear the thought of his religious reforms being undone, so he drafted a document that became known as his device for the succession, in which he bypassed both his half-sisters. And they, male descendants of the Grey line. When no such male heirs materialized, he altered the document to name Jane Grey herself. It was an extraordinary act. A dying teenage king, manipulated by his ambitious counselor, John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland. Northumberland, who had effectively ruled England through the young king, knew that Mary's accession would mean his own downfall. He needed a monarch he could control, so he arranged for his own son, Guildford Dudley, to marry Jane Grey in May of 1553, binding the new heiress to his family through marriage as well as through politics. Jane herself had no idea of the larger design. She was a reluctant bride, grieving her recent loss of her tutor, and she reportedly disliked Guildford. But disobedience was not an option for a Tudor daughter. The marriage went ahead, and Jane was now not only a royal heir, but a Dudley by marriage. A piece on the chessboard of men far more powerful than herself. On the 6th of July, 1553, King Edward died. The council kept his death secret for a few days to prepare the proclamation, and then on the 10th of July, Jane Grey was taken by barge down the Thames to the Tower of London, the traditional starting point of every new reign. where the monarch would stay before their coronation. It was there, in the fortress that would soon become her prison, that Jane was informed she was now Queen of England. Her reaction has become one of the most famous moments of her short life. She did not rejoice. She did not embrace the honor. She is said to have trembled, and then to have accepted the crown with visible distress, telling those present that the crown was not hers by right, and that she was unworthy of it. Some accounts say she wept. Others say she simply went pale and accepted, with the quiet horror of someone who understood exactly what was being done to her, and exactly how little power she had to refuse. The next 9 days unfolded in a strange, suspended atmosphere. Jane, now nominally queen, took her duties seriously. She signed state papers. She refused to make her husband Guildford a king, insisting he could be a duke at most, a decision that caused friction with the Dudley family. She attended council meetings. She was, by every indication, trying to do the job properly, even though the job had been thrust upon her without her consent. But outside the Tower, the political ground was already shifting. Mary Tudor, the rightful heir by Henry VIII's will, had fled to East Anglia and was gathering support. The Catholic nobility rallied to her. So did many ordinary people who saw in Mary the natural succession and a return to the old religion. Critically, the council members who had initially supported Jane began to defect, one by one, sensing which way the wind was blowing. By the 19th of July, just 9 days after Jane's proclamation, the Privy Council publicly declared for Mary. The people of London celebrated in the streets. Jane's own father, Henry Grey, who had been one of the architects of her proclamation, hauled down her royal standard from the Tower himself. The 9-day reign was over. Jane remained in the Tower, but her status had changed. She was no longer a queen in waiting, and she was a prisoner. The woman who arrived as a monarch never left those walls alive. Inas. Jane, blind, to be merciful to her young cousin. She recognized that Jane had been a pawn, not a plotter. A 16-year-old girl pushed onto the throne by men who had used her. For months, Jane lived under house arrest in the Tower, treated reasonably well. Jane would convert to Catholicism. Jane refused. With the same quiet stubbornness that had defined her whole life, she would not abandon her Protestant. She engaged in courteous debate with Catholic scholars sent to reason with her, and held her ground without anger, but also without compromise. The fragile hope of pardon survived through the autumn of 1553 and into the winter, and then in January 1554, everything changed. A Protestant uprising known as Wyatt's Rebellion broke out, aimed at overthrowing Mary and replacing her with her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth. The rebellion failed, but it sealed Jane's fate in a way she had nothing to do with, because the man who joined the rebellion, who took up arms against the Queen and attached the Grey name once more to treason, was Jane's own father, Henry Grey. It is one of the cruelest twists in this entire story. Henry Grey, the man who had pushed Jane toward the throne in the first place, now by his own foolish recklessness removed the last thing standing between his daughter and the executioner. As long as Jane lived, she was a banner rebels could rally around. Her father's rebellion proved the threat was real, And Mary, against her own inclination but under heavy pressure from her council, signed the warrant for Jane's execution. In her final days, Jane revealed a depth of character that her short, controlled life had rarely been allowed to show. She wrote letters of striking maturity. She wrote to her father, who had effectively doomed her, not with bitterness, but with forgiveness. She wrote in her prayer book for her younger sister, urging her to live a godly life. She debated her faith with the Catholic chaplain sent to convert her, treating him with such courtesy that the two reportedly developed a mutual respect. Ari, February 1554. Jane's young husband Guildford was led out to a public execution on Tower Hill. Jane is said to have watched from her window as he was taken away, and later as a horror no teenage bride should ever have to witness. A few hours later, Jane herself was led to a private scaffold on Tower Green, a small mercy granted in recognition of her royal blood. She spoke briefly and steadily to those gathered, acknowledging that she had wrongfully accepted the crown, but insisting she had never sought it. Then, blindfolded, she reached out for the block, and for one heart-stopping moment could not find it, crying out for help in the sudden darkness, guided gently into place. She spoke her final words, commending her spirit into God's hands. And so, at no more than 16 or 17 years old, the girl who had been queen for 9 days passed quietly into history. She had been a pawn in the hands of ruthless men, used and discarded in a game she had never wished to play. But in the manner of her death, in her courage, her forgiveness, and her unwavering faith, she became something far greater than a pawn. The girl who had begged to refuse a crown found, at her very end, a dignity that no crown could ever have bestowed. So tonight, as you sink into your soft good night, and dreamed of nothing more than to be left in peace. She was never allowed that peace in life. Perhaps, in some small way, we can offer it to her now. Rest easy. Good night.